Welcome. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to create and publish your podcast. It's free. That's right, free to download. With built-in tools to help you record and edit your podcast from your cell phone or any smart device. Anchor also distributes your podcast on virtually any platform that streams podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple and Google Podcasts, and many more. You can even monetize your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is your one-stop app for podcasting. Remember, it's free. Go to anchor.fm to create some amazing content.
Powered by Riverside.
Welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. I'm your host, LP. We talk about triggers on this podcast. We have uncensored conversations, we share information, and we provide a ton of resources. At any time that you may be triggered during this podcast, please call 911 because I'm not going to show up and my host is not going to show up. Also, we have a number of resources, as I said, including the new 911 number that's going to be out nationwide July 16th. That's 988. That's going to be the mental health 911 emergency number. We also will provide for the audio and video portion of this podcast. We have the domestic violence hotline and website, the sexual abuse hotline and website, the trafficking hotline and website. We added a few other numbers for people that have substance abuse and drug and alcohol issues. So we have Al-Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and a bunch of other resources that we have that will be listed in the description of the show notes. I have a very special guest who's going to be joining us in. He has a long CV. I'm not going to read the whole thing because the man is just the man. But this is Dr. Jordan Schaul. He is going to be talking to us about narcissism as it relates to domestic violence, specifically talking about men. I will have Dr. Jordan's information all in our show notes. I have a couple of his website and his Instagram page posted in the video description. If you all are going to be watching it on video, we are streaming on all podcasts now. iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google, Apple, and everywhere that you get your podcasts. We are available on all platforms now. Dr. Jordan, thank you for coming on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. And again, it is what we say what it is. We're going to just jump right into it. How are you doing, my friend?
Good, thank you. Glad to be here.
As I told you before we started, we're going to focus on narcissism as it relates to domestic violence regarding men. On your social media platforms, you've been posting a lot of content about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. I want to focus on your point of view when it comes to narcissism and domestic violence in relationship to men, because that's what you specialize in. So can you talk to us first? What's your view? How do you define narcissism? And why are you so interested in this particular lawsuit?
Sure. So first off, I'm not a clinician. Late in life, I became a coach.
Okay.
Because of lived experience with toxic workplaces, sometimes dysfunctional family systems, things that we've all been exposed to. And this isn't to fault or blame anyone.
Yes.
It's just what it is. But as COVID kind of kept us all home, I joined some online communities and really didn't anticipate getting very involved with trauma recovery. I've been in trauma recovery myself, and I found myself talking to men and women about relationships, having been involved with some women that were challenging, to say the least. And I really look at narcissism from a sociological standpoint. In other words, I don't look at it so much from a clinical standpoint, trying to pathologize people, but really kind of understanding, what makes us tick, how do we behave in certain contexts and not and differently in others. And I have to credit Dr. Natalie Martinick, who is also a former academic like myself,
Yes.
had experienced kind of politically challenging workplace environments, also understands family systems. And together we've kind of pushed out, these narratives and opportunities to further discourse and discussion about what it's like to be around toxic people. We even did a lot of role playing at one point. So my perspective really is that, if you date someone who is not really very self-aware, someone who is emotionally dysregulated, and we all can be emotionally dysregulated from time to time, and also someone who exhibits a lot of dichotomous thinking. So they see things as all or nothing. They look at the world through a very rigid lens, if you will. I was there myself. Through my own trauma recovery, I had to learn to be more dialectical in my thinking from my own personality adaptations. And so as I began to work on myself, I began to understand how we kind of assume these different roles in these relationships, whether we're very codependent, and one person may be very much an empath and the other may be more narcissistic, and kind of understanding how these things play out. Now, so I'll stop there and let you maybe jump in and ask more questions. I didn't mean to go on so long there.
No. Our interviews are 80% the interviewee. It's not about me, it's about the guest. Go ahead and continue.
Sure. So one of the things that's interesting is that the O.J. Simpson trial had brought out a lot of it kind of put domestic violence into the public's consciousness.
Okay.
But it was focused on a very, very violent crime. And, Nicole Brown Simpson had been emotionally and physically abused in that relationship. But again, it was a criminal case and the focus was on who did it, right? And we didn't get into the emotional abuse. But that's really a part of what intimate partner violence is. In about 2000 or so, well after the O.J. Simpson trial, the trauma specialists and clinicians kind of started to change the way we think about domestic violence. It's not just about someone in the home. It can be a relationship with people living apart. Okay. It can also be emotional and not just physical abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse. And so what this trial has done, I by no means did I want to sensationalize it, but I saw the opportunity to talk about emotional abuse, and I host Scapegoat Strength with a psychotherapist who's also very interested in family systems. But we talked about, how Amber Heard presented, on the stand, and just some of the nonverbal behavior and the verbal behavior or communication and the deceit and some of the things we heard in the audio and the things that really add up for people who have experienced a partner who is has a sense of entitlement, who is lacking empathy, who is very manipulative, gaslights a lot. I think for many people who watch this trial closely, and particularly men, they said, wow, that resonates with me. I didn't get a chance to tell my story because people automatically assumed I was the bad guy because I'm the guy. And so people really resonate with Johnny Depp and his story. And yeah, he's endearing and he's an actor and maybe there are moments, I don't see him as someone so narcissistic. He is an A-list actor, of course, but I really could feel his pain, the sense of being confused. Maybe the important part is that when you are, and I talked about this with Laura Taylor yesterday in a room on Clubhouse, how, you feel really confused when you've been gaslighted. It's not so much that you're angry. I did an interview about reactive abuse just as the trial was starting, and how people can respond very reactively and be abusive, I guess, in their own right in response to someone attacking them, right?
Yes.
Physically, of course, or emotionally, or verbally, rather. But Johnny, that didn't come across so strongly. What came across was a guy who was confused. Like, what's going on? Why is she saying this? Why is she, like, there's a lot of half truths here even. And I remember when I was dating women like this, and I had two experiences. I won't go into much detail, but I remember being very confused. I'm like, wow, they're telling me that I did something to them, but actually they were doing that to me. And that accusation is very common, that you're doing something which they're really doing. They're accusing you of something that they're really doing. And just the lies and the deceit, the triangulation, getting third parties involved, telling them one thing, telling you something else, just a lot of manipulation. Last comment I'll make on this, we'll continue, but what really hit home was that, she seemed to not only exploit opportunities, but she wasn't accountable for anything. She didn't seem accountable. Granted, she's on the witness stand. I was going to say something else, but I'll probably jog my memory in a second.
Expectations of accountability. Let's jump on that.
Okay.
From your view as someone who sees patients or clients,
Right.
correct? Clients, not patients. My apologies. For someone that
In a
coaching sense, right?
Yeah.
Right. So someone who sees clients on a regular basis, because this is your bread and butter. The men that you see, let's talk about reactive abuse as it relates to the expectations of accountability. What are some of the things that the men are saying to you in regards to those two things? Because you got reactive abuse, and then you have the accountability portion. Because most men feel like, I don't want to really say anything about my abuse because I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be shamed, I'm going to be ridiculed, I'm going to be probably made like one of these viral memes, like what happened with Tyrese when he talked about his issue with his daughter and the custody and he was crying. What happened? They made a meme out of it. Same thing happened with Will Smith on the Entanglement episode of Red Table Talk. He was crying. What happened? They made a meme out of it. Same thing, even with Jordan in a situation where he was getting enshrined in the NBA Hall of Fame, one of the greatest nights of his life. He was crying. What happened? They made a meme out of him. Most guys say, you know what? If that can happen to these celebrity rich guys, I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want to be made into some crying meme. I don't want to be the butt of jokes and all this stuff. So when we talk about abuse, domestic abuse, reactive abuse with men, what's the expectation of accountability that they deal with or they talk to you about? Because they want the woman to be responsible for her actions, but we know there's things that fall out about that on a negative connotation.
Well, a couple people that I have encountered among men, they felt disempowered. A couple of them have been in court, and they feel that these smear campaigns against them. There's a stigma, of course, that it's easy now. They seem to sense that it's easy for women to accuse them of physical and psychological abuse because of stigma and history, and so they feel like the narrative's already out there that they're wrong and they're fighting an uphill battle, and so they don't feel empowered to really tell their story. What they do feel is that they're looking for someone. They're looking for other men, actually, whether it's a clinician, a coach, or just a friend to corroborate or commiserate with them. Just to say, hey, wow, this is really happening to me. Like, I'm not, I'm not being soft here. Not that we should judge that at all, but they're a little confused as to how to approach it because there is some stigma involved for sure. And sometimes also, I think one of the problems is they talk to clinicians who don't have a lot of lived experience. Laura Taylor is a good example of a female, of a clinician who deals with men, and she's comfortable. She understands their perspective. But a lot of the women are a little bit skeptical. Like, for example, with the Amber Heard case, it was assumed that because he was older and an A-lister that he had the power and control in the relationship and had the money. I don't see that to be the case at all when you hear the audio. So a lot of these other men also cower because they feel that if they get too defensive and act reactive in any way, that they're going to be accused of doing something. So it's almost like that they're the default, right? And so if you're in the default role, you tread very carefully. You have to be very opportunistic in picking the right battles to talk about so that things don't, fall back on you. So does that help?
Absolutely. When I look at the Amber Heard case, and I haven't followed it on a daily basis, my mom has, so she's the resident expert, along with, I would say, because she loves, she's retired, so like court TV is her favorite. And so we talk about some of these cases that come up. And I remember a conversation that we had early on. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, so I was visiting there back in last month, and we were talking about the case. And one thing she said to me, she said, you know what, I think that in a lot of situations, and we kind of don't talk about this, but she said, sometimes the downfall of a man is a woman. And I said, what do you mean specifically when you're saying it? She said, I can point out situations where men that I know where their moms have been the reason that they're not successful because the way that the mom brought the man up. I can talk about situations that I know of in the media, like with this case, where, like you said, here's Johnny, the A-lister, Amber Heard, she's made a name for herself, but she's not Johnny Depp. Same thing like with the Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith situation. They're both actors. He's the A-plus lister. She's an A-lister herself. And look at those situations, these dynamics. And she started just listing all of these different situations, famous, infamous people that she knew about, that she knows about, and kind of just laid it out. And I just sat there. She said, for me, at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that even in my situation, I was married to someone who was a narcissist, and we got married twice. And each time it was like, I thought love would conquer all. I thought therapy would conquer all. I thought church would conquer all. I thought prayer would conquer all. I thought our family unit would conquer all, saving that family unit, because we both grew up in broken homes, grew up poor. We both had issues in our families with substance abuse, and we did everything 180 degrees different to avoid recycling those traumas that we experienced generationally. But it wasn't enough, Dr. Jordan. And so we had a very deep conversation about that. What do you say to those generational curses, if you want to call them, to those situations where you got this affluent couple, you have these power couples, or these situations where the man is looked at to be able to handle whatever he's thrown, even in the home? We know that that's not the case all the time because, again, men have feelings too. We're not cyborgs. We're not one-cell amoebas. We're not robots. We live and breathe and die and all that stuff too. When you're talking to these men and they approach you, how do you help them combat the narcissism in the home?
Well, a lot of them, like Johnny, he recognizes, and it sounds like he's been in therapy he's worked with family counselors. marriage and family therapist, sounds like, or couples therapist. And, it's clear, it came out, I think, in the trial that his mother was fairly abusive.
Yes.
Or one parent was. So, that what Amber may be very familiar to him, but he probably didn't occur to him that, this is my mom belittling me in it, but it's a romantic partner. And so he was accustomed to that. And it was, he was seems like a bit of a savior, right? Kind of helping this damsel in distress, so to speak. But really, she was belittling him. And when I heard her say, "No one will believe you," I feel like that was echoed throughout the world. Men hearing that all over the place. No one will believe you. That was such a poignant remark. As far as I'm concerned, the trial was done right there.
That was it.
Boom. But the weird part is, I've gotten a lot of backlash on social media, sharing some of my articles about this, and I've engaged in some, I've been on some threads where I've responded to people, and it's interesting. The people who haven't watched the trial very closely are quick to assume Johnny is at much more fault. Again, it's the stereotype. It's the male. He's the older A-lister. When they actually watch the video, as you've seen it, or some of these clips, it's hard to disregard her behavior. In addition to the way she behaves on the stand, just dismissive and always right, and quite frankly, she's not such a great actress. If she was a better actress, I'm not trying to pick on her here, but she probably could have pulled it off a lot better. And maybe to his credit, he's a good actor, and he does a little better. He's a little more polished. But regardless, everyone seems to see through this. In fact, what's so interesting to me is, despite the forensic psychologists who had both talked about, one suggested, presumptive diagnosis was borderline personality and his borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. The other talked about PTSD, and but they failed to mention, and we're not surprised by the defense not mentioning it, but they failed to mention the narcissistic traits, which are also cluster B, along with borderline traits and histrionic. But that wasn't mentioned, and yet you can look at social media and listen to stories and memes and audio on TikTok. Anyone in their right mind who's picked up on narcissism as it's been popularized in these last few years, it's like, wow, boom, that's it. Like, they dismiss the diagnoses presented by the forensic scientists, and we're quick to pick up on, that person feels entitled, they're manipulative. We don't even need DSM references. It's just humanity. We know when someone is a dark person, or dark personality, rather. Dark tetrad traits is what I'm referring to, which is sociopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sadism. And that hypothetical subclinical construct is, there's narcissism, is threaded throughout all those types of people.
One thing that I thought about during this trial, as well as what we saw at the 2022 Oscars, the famous slap incident between Will Smith and Chris Rock. And I don't want to deep dive into that with you, but I do want to ask you about your thoughts about that, because again, I believe that what we saw is not everything that we know about now. And I believe there's way more to the story than what we saw in that few minutes of video, even though it was live. When you saw that slap or that whole thing play out, what played into your mind then and now?
Great question. So when Jada looked at him with the kind of the side eye look, he had been laughing, and then suddenly he was prompted to get up, did that on his own volition. He was trying to make a statement because he He didn't want. I think the perception of his wife he was considering, the perception of the public. I don't think in any regard did he want to go up and hit anybody. I think he wanted to, do right by his wife and look like he was doing right by his wife. And I think if that had occurred in private, there would have been no confrontation. But I think that, men are the stigma that we're not sticking up or whatever. I mean, I could see Amber being the same as Jada, filming that role in that same scenario. Like, you're going to let someone, mock me like that or whatever. Could have been his best friend, and he had to go up and kind of make things look right. Be the protector, and so men are kind of, straddling a fine, a tightrope in many regards. Like, wow, you got to be tough and macho, and yet many of them are being dominated by their partners, their female partners. So it's a real dichotomy that is misunderstood, I think, by so many people.
I did a room. Or I was part of a room recently, and I was talking about, well, let me restate that. I'm a part of a room. It's called Men ESN, which stands for the Empowerment Support Network. And we meet every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Central Time on Clubhouse. And we also have a Facebook group entitled Men_ESN. We talk about
this
men.
This is Will's group, right?
Will, yeah, so I'm part of that. So it's myself, Will Baptiste, Will Kesselman, Randy Brown, Martin John Garcia, and Eric Al. So we're the founding members of that. I say that men grow up with an additional set of the 3 R's outside of the 3 R's that we learn about here in the States. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Men grow up with an additional set of the 3 R's, and that's learning how to be rough, rugged, and raw. And I told the guys in this group one time, I said, I had a relative who told me, and this is a male relative when I was a kid, there's only a number of reasons why a man should cry or show emotions. They have to have a bone sticking out of their body, falling off a multi-story building, be crushed between a number of cars, or somebody had to be dead or dying, or they either won or lost a major sporting event. When I talk to other men about these things, they're like, man, I heard some of the same things too. I was told some of the same things also. I've had some of those very same experiences with this. I guess you can throw it under toxic masculinity in a sense. You can't cry because you're considered a punk, you're considered a FAG, you're considered a sissy. All these negative seeds that were planted in our heads as young boys. Don't play with dolls because, you might turn gay or something like that. Or you might be looked at sideways and different things like that. For men, I want to know from your point of view, when you talk to these guys, and I'm sure you go back to their childhood to get kind of a preview of maybe their experiences from a young person to see maybe this person was more predestined to be in a relationship with a female narcissist compared to maybe somebody else. Do you have these discussions with guys about those situations?
Well, I try to stay away from, I don't enter in a therapeutic relationship. So where I come in is a bit more pragmatic in the sense that, how do we implement boundaries?
Okay.
How do you thwart the kind of exploitation, the triangulation that may surface? What are some of the practices or the habits that you get into to kind of keep yourself grounded in a safe, in a safe mindset to thwart reactivity, your own emotional dysregulation in contested heated conversations or whatever. But I think by the time most people talk to me, they're pretty angry, and they're feeling like they just want their story to be heard. I'm not suggesting there haven't been examples where people have gotten pretty emotional, but more of it is the anger and the betrayal and the confusion. So I'm sure that people bring that to the attention of therapists, just not me as much.
Okay.
Because we're kind of already in the space. We're kind of already in the space where, okay, how do we keep you from, getting entangled with this person How do you keep boundaries and keep your head, be level-headed? So I'd have to think about that more, but it's true. I mean, one of the things is that these narcissistic, we'll call them narcissistic women, right?
Okay.
Hypothetically, they're weaponizing these opportunities. If someone shows weakness, whether they're a man or a woman, quite frankly, they're going to jump on it. That's predatory from my perspective. And so I think the men learn pretty quickly, and I could be wrong, but I think many of them learn pretty quickly that if they show that quote unquote perceived weakness, that, with that dominant partner, they're going to be in trouble. So they learn through experience probably to stay away from that. But yeah, they may get a bit emotional, particularly like if they're a Johnny Depp and want to kind of save and fix that person and they're in that toxic codependency. I think they do get fairly emotional and want to say, I really just love this person, as Johnny, I think, tried to convey. And that's where I think they get very sentimental.
Your scapegoatstrength.com website. I love the logo with the goat with the heart on it. When you guys came up with this concept and this title, because I see that's trademark also, so thumbs up. What was the thought process behind Scapegoat Strength? Why that title?
Well, one, I was a zoologist for much of my career and a veterinary scientist, and I worked in zoos, right? And I've worked with a few sheep and goats in my day. There's also the Jewish reference to the scapegoat and looking from a religious standpoint and historical perspective. But, I was very much a black sheep in my family. I was always I was a bit of a black sheep in many environments, right? And so it's easy for the black sheep to be scapegoated. They're not always one and the same. They may be, but without getting into too much internal family system discussion,
sure, people
can be scapegoated at home or in the workplace. It's kind of the pathology of the system, not the individual. And so you'll often find that, like, let's say a toxic workplace, someone who's scapegoated, there may really be nothing wrong with them, but they come into a system that's toxic and they become kind of a target.
Okay.
And that can happen in family systems too. So that's why I did it. I mean, but there's so many ways to look at this. I brought in the analogy of Ukraine, how Ukraine has been scapegoated.
Yeah.
I want people to understand from a systemic point of view that you aren't, as they say, kind of as clinicians, the identified patient is what I was looking for. You're not the identified patient in the family or in the workplace, if you will, or amongst your group of friends, your fraternity, whatever. It's the system is more pathological, right? And so people get targeted and they don't understand why, and they're confused, and then they kind of perpetuate some of the behaviors. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Or it's prophetic in some capacity. You kind of live up to that underdog, black sheep, scapegoat role that you've been conditioned in to be in. You're programmed to play that role. And it's only until you find another social unit that gives you a different kind of reinforcement, positive reinforcement, that you wonder, wow, was that my narrative? And so, like with Johnny Depp, let's say hypothetically he was the scapegoat in his family system.
Okay.
I don't know if he was or not. I don't remember what his siblings who testified had to say, but he may have been scapegoated by his mom, and then he was used to taking abuse in that regard, and so he took it from his partners, or at least from Amber Heard. So I think that's the important part. The reason Scapegoat Strength is important in the name is because even in the popular psychology literature, there's discussions of people who've been scapegoated develop this strength because they've been beaten down and they've been oppressed. the Jewish community, the African American community. People can resonate with oppression, and as a culture, and as of course an individual. But so understanding that you have this strength, that you have empathy, because you kind of develop these coping mechanisms to read your environment. It wasn't safe, and so you have this strength. What I refer to as a strength is this resilience, because you're used to being on the outside looking in. And so you cultivate this power, which is in part an intuition and an empathy, and also a willingness to go your own way, take your own path. People might call me a black sheep, a scapegoat, someone who certainly took their own path in this world. And, it's not, like I say about empaths, it's not a badge of honor. It's often a sign of trauma.
Okay.
And it's also not to accuse other people or blame other people. It was just the environment that you grow up in, and the generational trauma influenced the people who preceded you, whether it was in the work environment. I'm kind of loosely just using that reference, but particularly in the family system. Generational trauma, it just gets passed down in that regard, and people get scapegoated.
I want to wrap up with solutions. I'm a person who believes in not just talk. I'd rather sit at home, binge watching Netflix and picking the lid out of my belly button than just having discussions. Then there is no plan of action or plans of action. Dr. Jordan, for the men that you see as clients, what type of plan or plans of actions do you help them create or create with them in terms of dealing with narcissism and domestic violence?
Well, I think you have to be holistic. And I think that if someone's not in therapy and doesn't have a strong sense of self, and they likely don't, they're kind of looking for answers. They're chasing the wrong people all the time. They'll go to another person who is likely to be abusive in some way, even just perhaps emotionally. So kind of understanding why you're attracted to that toxic chemistry, whether it's an attachment issue. And again, these are things that therapists are primarily working on. It's important to understand it if you're working with people as a quote unquote behaviorist, if you will, in organizational behavior or whatever. But I think that, this is where like psychotherapy comes into play. People can kind of understand their childhood trauma, developmental trauma, enmeshment trauma per se, and kind of understand why they end up in relations with people. And that, I think, is one way that they realize, they don't even recognize that something is wrong. They may understand that their partner is being abusive, but they also probably are believing many of the things that partner's saying. So they may be, they may think of themselves at fault. So kind of understanding the dynamic and where it comes from. And then, if you're into high drama, high conflict people, there's an addiction there, and so, or can be. So, when you finally meet someone who's kind of calm and peaceful and quite frankly, some might say boring, that's heaven. That's heaven for people. Yeah. And I used to chase these women that were like, I'm like, God, why am I punishing myself like this? I was like, I wouldn't be interested in someone who wasn't dramatic and, high conflict. It was boring and uninteresting. I didn't get it. So, that's kind of where I would start is understanding those things. And then, people go to Codependence Anonymous. I remember I would go to Codependence Anonymous, and I didn't get for the longest time why they don't want you to be dating anyone when you're in these 12-step programs, and particularly that one, right? And it's because these people who have insecure attachment styles and a lot of codependency, they're constantly, they got to be with someone, and they're afraid to work on themselves, and they attach themselves to somebody, and it just perpetuates this cycle. So, you want to be validated by people, or these people often need that external validation. They can't validate themselves, and they keep looking for other people to do it. and they don't understand that. They just think that they're attracted to somebody else, and they're chasing them around, but they don't understand what's really at play. I didn't understand what was really at play.
Dr. Jordan, you have dropped so many nuggets for us, man. I'm going to have you come back, and we're going to have to deep dive into some of these specifics, because I know for me, I believe in my definition of community is common plus unity plus dialogue. You can't have one without the other. And part of my goal as an advocate is to raise awareness, especially when it comes to men. That's why I'm part of the Men ESN group. That's why I have these types of podcasts. That's why I invite esteemed guests like yourself onto the platform, because I want people to not just hear me talk. I want to invite people in that deal with this every single day. I want people to come in and talk about things that people don't like talking about. That's why we call it Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, because I don't do the iceberg conversations. Everybody wants to talk about the 10%, but the 90% that you don't see that's under the water, that's the real crux of where the problem is, where the issues are and all that stuff. I say, let's flip that iceberg upside down. You need some snorkel or scuba gear, because we're about to deep dive into these conversations. So I want to thank you, Dr. Jordan, for coming on to our platform and having this discussion and opening our eyes to how men see these issues, because we want our women to understand also that, hey, men aren't just the only ones that are narcissists. And we're not saying all women are, just like all men aren't narcissists or violent and different things like that. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to make this ride smoother. And you coming on today is helping that path along the way. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. How can people get in touch with you? And what's the quickest way they can get in touch with you?
Sure. So I direct people to my main website, jordanschaul.com or drjordanschaul.com. It redirects. And scapegoatstrength.com, though, is my kind of coaching and consulting business that caters to both organizations and people. And again, I work with clinicians because I've seen that there's opportunities for people with this background, with lived experience, to kind of help their clients. So in conjunction, it's often a team effort. So, but I come from a different perspective, not a therapeutic one.
Sure.
Absolutely, scapegoatstrength.com.
Absolutely. We will have all of Dr. Jordan's links into the audio and video portion. And I call him Dr. Jordan. That's my buddy. He's Dr. Jordan C. Schaul. He is definitely somebody.
Well, you can call me, anyone can call me Jordan, but titles just tease out the narcissism right now. Yeah, thank you.
That's all I was waiting on. Dr. Jordan C. Schaul, I really appreciate you, brother. And definitely we're going to have to collaborate on some more projects. And I'll see you in some of these clubhouse streets. We're definitely going to be moving the needle towards awareness and talking about expectations of accountability. So I want to thank you so much for joining. Again, if you were triggered at any point during our conversation, call 911 or check some of the resources that we will have listed in the audio and video portion of the show description notes. Dr. Jordan, peace and blessings be upon you, sir. Until next time.
Thank you, sir. I'd love to come back. Appreciate it.
No problem. We're going to jump into the next portion of our podcast as Dr. Jordan drops off here, where we talk about a missing person case. Now, these missing person cases that we cover, 99% of them are about Black and brown men, women, and children, because we want to bring the same energy, the same awareness, and the same media coverage that we don't see for these individuals. These includes kidnappings. These includes any child abductions and runaways. Today's case that I'm going to cover is about a young little girl. Her name is Tika Lewis. And let me bring that up real quick, because my wife is our resident missing persons expert, as well as she does the rape advocacy for some of the people that we interview talk about. Little Tika Lewis. And let me see, I got the link here. Bring it up here. When I saw this story the other day, I was really set back because it really hurt my feelings to know that this little girl's been missing since 1999. That tells you how far back the story goes. I saw Nancy Grace was covering this story on HLN, and here's the story.
This little girl, Tika Lewis, right there, was kidnapped from a bowling alley in Pierce County. Well, now police are releasing new details about a potential person of interest. Kara 7's Southtown reporter Shelby Miller is live now in Tacoma with reaction from her family. Shelby?
Monique, this Home Depot parking lot is where that bowling alley once stood. In 1999, the 2-year-old disappeared from right here. Today, police released new information, and they hope you can help.
In 21 years, I've thought of my daughter every single day.
January 23rd, 1999. Robert Lewis's life changed forever. Police say someone abducted his innocent, brown-eyed baby girl from the New Frontier bowling alley in Tacoma. More than 2 decades later, Robert hasn't given up hope.
We sit there and we watch Blue's Clues, and she'll have her Tweety Bird slippers on, and that's what I remember, just my little baby.
Thursday, Tacoma police released new details about the investigation. Detectives are searching for information about a white man who's 30 to 40 years old, has brown curly hair, a mustache, and pockmarks on his face. They say he was seen at the bowling alley the night the 2-year-old was abducted. These developments stopped Tika's father in his tracks.
Put me right back to when I was in prison, to 1999. When I was in prison, I got that phone call.
This is what detectives believe Tika Lewis looked like at 16 and 18 years old. Last year, Washington State Patrol relaunched their Homeward Bound program, putting the faces of missing children on truck trailers.
Those eyes right there. And she's telling me, bring me home.
Tika's parents hope these developments bring their now 23-year-old daughter back home.
I love you with all my heart. I am not a complete man. I won't ever be until your return.
The family's annual vigil will be held right here in the parking lot at 7 o'clock this evening. If you have any information on this case or those new developments, please call police. Reporting live in Tacoma, Shelby Miller, Cairo 7 News.
Again, Tika Lewis, missing since 1999. We will have the link to this story in the show description, in the show notes, as well as the information about Dr. Jordan in the show notes. I want to thank you all for joining the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. I'm your host, LP, and as I always say, live in awareness, don't live in fear. Keep your head on a swivel. Make sure that you take care of yourself. Peace and blessings be upon you and your families forevermore. LP out.